Welcome to The Explainer. What if I told you the history of Canada isn't really a story of peace and harmony, but a 400-year-long argument? Well, today, we're going to dive into that argument and see what it means for Canada's future.
When you think of Canada, you probably picture politeness, maple syrup, maybe a Mountie. But is that the real story? What if we pull back that curtain and find a history that's actually full of intense conflict, constant negotiation, and some very, very unfinished business? That's exactly what we're going to do.
So, to really get Canada, we can't just start in 1867. We have to go way, way back to a time before any Europeans arrived, when this land was home to a really complex network of Indigenous nations, each with their own laws, their own cultures, and their own histories. You've probably heard the old story about Europeans discovering a new world, an empty land just waiting for them. Well, that idea, sometimes called terra nullius, is a complete myth. The reality is, they arrived in a world that was already ancient, a continent buzzing with sophisticated societies that have been thriving for millennia. And get this, one of the most incredible examples of this governance is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. This was a powerful alliance of 6 nations built on principles of peace and democracy. Their constitution, the Great Law of Peace, is one of the oldest living constitutions anywhere on the planet. Just an amazing testament to their political genius.
And when you put these two systems side by side, it's night and day. You've got the Haudenosaunee model, all about building consensus and with women the clan mothers holding real power, like appointing and even removing chiefs. And then you have the Canadian model from 1867, majority rules, and politics was a game played exclusively by men.
So into this established world in the 16th and 17th centuries come the Europeans. And this changes everything. It's a massive collision of worlds, a clash of empires, and it kicks off a whole new and often violent chapter in the story of this land.
Now, the fur trade was the economic engine for the French in North America, but don't picture it as a simple takeover. It was way more complicated. It was a middle ground where cultures met, negotiated, and had to adapt to each other. Indigenous peoples weren't just victims here. They were essential partners who shaped how the whole thing worked.
This imperial rivalry between Britain and France was a global war, but the fate of North America was pretty much decided on a little field outside Quebec City. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham was incredibly fast and bloody. It was all over in less than half an hour. But those 30 minutes changed the continent forever. It was the end of the French Empire here, and the beginning of British rule.
And here's something that really shows you the European mindset at the time. When the war ended, France had a choice. Keep its huge, cold North American territory, or keep a tiny but super profitable sugar island called Guadeloupe. They chose the island. The famous writer Voltaire just dismissed Canada as a few acres of snow. And just like that, the fate of this place was sealed. All right, so the French are out and the British are in charge. Problem solved, right? Not even close. Now they had a new set of problems. These colonies were huge, they were diverse, and they were really hard to govern. Plus, a new threat was brewing to the south, the United States.
Let's be clear, Canadian Confederation wasn't born from some soaring patriotic vision. It was more like a shotgun wedding, a marriage of convenience. The colonies were terrified of the Americans, Britain was sick of paying for their defense, and the local politicians were stuck in a hopeless gridlock. Something had to change. So how did it all happen? The road to creating Canada was, well, it was a process. It started with a pretty boozy, informal meeting in Charlottetown. Then it got serious in Quebec City, where they hammered out the actual blueprint. And it all ended in London, where the British Parliament officially signed off and the Dominion of Canada was born.
The whole thing nearly fell apart over one issue: power. The English-speaking colonies wanted a strong central government, but French-speaking Quebec was determined to protect its unique language and culture. The solution was a classic Canadian compromise, a delicate balancing act that gave the federal government control over big national stuff, while provinces got to keep control over local things. It wasn't perfect, but it was the fudge that made the country possible.
So Canada is now a thing, and the new country has this massive ambition to build a nation that stretches from sea to shining sea. It's a grand dream, but it's a dream that would come at a terrible, terrible cost for the Indigenous peoples of the West. To make that dream a reality, the government needed land for settlers and for that transcontinental railway. So it launched a massive treaty-making process. From the government's point of view, these were basically real estate deals, a way to extinguish Aboriginal title and get the land. But for Indigenous peoples, these treaties meant something completely different.
And this just lays out the fundamental conflict perfectly. You have the Crown, seeing it as a one-time legal transaction to surrender land. Then you have the Indigenous understanding that these were sacred covenants, solemn promises to share the land and live in peace forever. It's a complete clash of worldviews.
Well, when you have two such different understandings, conflict is almost inevitable. The Northwest Resistance of 1885 was a brief and tragic uprising by the Métis and their First Nations allies. They were trying to protect their way of life from the new Canadian state, and though it was crushed, the consequences were profound and long-lasting for everyone. Okay, let's jump forward to the 20th century. This was a time of massive change for Canada. We're talking wars, economic booms and busts, huge social shifts, and somewhere in all that chaos, a new, distinct Canadian identity started to take shape, one that wasn't just about being a junior partner to Britain.
For a lot of people, the moment Canada really grew up was the Battle of Vimy Ridge during World War I. It was an incredible military victory, a result of brilliant planning and unbelievable bravery. But it came at a staggering cost. Over 10,000 Canadians were killed or wounded. It was a victory, but a brutal one.
As you can see from this timeline, Canada's journey to full independence wasn't a big bang like the American Revolution. It was very Canadian. A slow, quiet, gradual process that unfolded over more than 100 years. No big wars of liberation, just a series of steps that slowly loosened the ties to Britain.
And that brings us right up to today, to the final, and frankly, the most difficult chapter in our story. This chapter is all about a long overdue reckoning with the past, about confronting the dark legacy of colonialism, and about trying to build a new, more just relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
For more than a century, the Canadian government and churches ran a system of residential schools. The stated goal? To kill the Indian in the child. More than 150,000 Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families and sent to these schools. What happened there was abuse, neglect, and what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has called a cultural genocide.
In 2015, that commission released its final report. It included 94 calls to action, basically a roadmap for how to redress this horrible legacy and move forward. But as this chart shows pretty clearly, we still have a very, very long way to go.
So, the story of Canada is the story of an argument that has never really ended. It's a country still grappling with its past, still negotiating its future. And the big question now is, are we up to the task? Are we willing to do the hard work of reconciliation and build a future that's more just for everyone? The answer to that question is really going to determine what this country becomes.